Welcome to Real Rockford Files, for tales of the paranormal, supernatural, and the flat-out unbelievable. Today I'm going to be sharing ghost stories from Kentucky. Let's get into it. Story 1. Before I get started, I'll share some background information. The location where this happened is my grandparents' home that they have owned for 20 plus years. Many of my relatives have had unexplainable experiences in this house. My grandfather says the man who owned the house previously died in the home as a result of an accident. People, including myself, have heard footsteps, dishes and glass breaking, things falling, etc. It's summertime in my small town of Albany, Kentucky, and I was about 12 at the time. The county fair was going on, so my parents dropped me off with my friends, and my grandparents picked me up later that evening because they lived close to the fairgrounds. I've always been really close with my grandparents and would stay the night with them frequently. This night, however, I didn't feel very welcome. I was in the guest room, which had been built onto the house some years before that I slept in every time I stayed the night. I had gotten ready to go to sleep, so I had the TV on for the light, but I had it muted. After tossing and turning for what felt like an eternity, I was still uncomfortable. I turned the bedside lamp on and finally started drifting to sleep. I was barely conscious in that half-awake, half-asleep state, lying on my side with both my hands tightly tucked underneath the pillow. All of a sudden, I was jolted awake when I felt something or someone grab a section of my hair and pull really hard. Growing up with a mother who fixed my hair every day, I was not tender-headed. When I opened my eyes, although I didn't see anything, I was understandably terrified. I was frozen with fear. I really couldn't move for what felt like an eternity. When I finally got the courage, I tore out of the bedroom and ran down the hallway to my grandparents' room. I was crying and frantic, telling them what happened. My grandfather got up and got his gun, went through the house room by room, thinking someone may have broke in. No one was in the house besides us, and there were no signs that anyone had gotten in and left. The next morning, I had a huge welt in my hairline where my hair had been pulled so hard the night before. I have had so many other stories to share about this house, but those are for later. Story 2. This story happened in Kentucky in 2017, and then again in 2019. My mother was ill for a while and always said she never wanted to be placed in an old folks' home. She wanted a promise, so to make her feel better, we said we wouldn't. But as it happened sometimes, her illness got worse. We couldn't keep her at home anymore. We had to place her. I cried for 2 weeks, thinking I had broken a promise to her. She wasn't there for long before she passed in 2017, 3 months before her birthday. Days after that, tired from all the commotion of the funeral, I was awoken from a sound sleep. I heard my mother call my name. I quickly got up out of bed and went to her room to see what she needed, but the bed was empty and I remembered she had passed. I went back to bed and cried. For 2 weeks this happened, and every time I would automatically get up only to be greeted with an empty bed. It stopped after a while and life went on. 2 years later, in 2019, my father got sick. His hospital stay was brief and he passed quickly. And again, for 2 weeks straight, I heard him call my name. I got up to go help him only to realize he had passed. I know this may sound weird, but I talk to my folks at times, telling them I love and miss them, things like that. When alive, both parents were a buffer to an in-law that would get creepy whenever we would talk, text, or write. We would get in fights, and he would get nasty and rude. With them both gone, he wants to text again. I simply asked to myself, if trouble will come of this, for 2 weeks I'd wake up hearing yes. My question was that my folks' voice I heard after they died? And is this my folks warning me to stay clear of the creepy in-law? Story 3. I was quite young at the time this happened. I would venture to say I was no older than 7. Before my parents divorced, my family lived in Kentucky. The home was built in 1910. My siblings and I have reports of odd things happening, but this is the most upsetting one for me. During my time in the house, I frequently experienced disturbing and recurring nightmares. The atmosphere of the house was unsettling and tense. I was never very happy there. One night, I had woken up very late. I decided that I didn't want to sleep in my bedroom alone, so I walked down the short hall to my brother's room and started setting up a sleeping arrangement on the toy chest at the end of their bed. As I am doing this, I turn to the right and looked at the doorway adjacent to me. I saw an angelic, beautiful woman standing there. She had a flower crown and white garment on. She just stood there looking at me carefully and calmly. I froze with fear. It felt like the wind was knocked out of my chest, and I felt a rush of adrenaline. I regained as much composure as I had at the age of 7 and booked it to my parents' room, which was connected to my brother's room luckily. I hid on my mother's side of the bed that blocked sight of the doorway. I stuck my head under the covers that draped over the bed and never felt so helpless. The unsettling ambience that my father's CPAP created did not help the situation. My mother wouldn't wake up, and I was not willing to risk being seen in order to wake my father. I peeked out from the side of the bed, and she was no longer in the doorway. I still did not feel safe moving, so I slept on the floor that night, halfway under the bed. I have a suspicion that this experience may have sparked a streak of disturbing existentialism while we lived in this house. Many nights I would come to my mother crying and telling her of my fear of death and inquiring about the afterlife. I'm sure it worried her, given that I couldn't have been older than 7 at the time, but it came to a stop shortly after we moved. I'm not sure if anyone has had similar to this experience or has had any commentaries on it, but please do not hesitate to leave your thoughts in the comments. Before I end the story, I would particularly like to hear what people think of the angel. I have always been very wary of the intentions and origins of her, but I also have no other definitive ID of her. The memory of her instills great panic in me, and I feel intensely paranoid just writing about this incident. I apologize if this feels rushed and or unorganized, and I thank you for taking the time to read this. Story 4. When I was 20, I moved into my first apartment, which was in an older home in the Highland area of Louisville. It was a beautiful home, and the rent was super affordable for the area. Despite sensing a feeling of a presence during the walkthrough, I was still excited to move in. It didn't take long for paranormal activity to start. One evening, my roommate and I were hanging out in the living room, and all of a sudden, a picture frame and books flew off the built-in bookshelf next to us, as if they were pushed off. I think it's important to note that these were very deep built-in shelves. If the frame and books had just fallen over, it would have still been in the shelf. We just looked at each other, completely in shock of what had just happened, and trying to rationalize how it could have happened, but knew unless they were pushed, they wouldn't have flown off the shelf the way they did. The next occurrence happened when I was in the shower. I saw a tall, dark figure walk past the shower door and assumed it was my roommate, since he was tall and work uniform was black. I started talking to him, but got no response, and didn't see anyone pass by again. When I got out of the shower, I went around to the other side of the bathroom to the sink vanity area and said, "Hello, did you hear me?" Only to come around the corner and find no one there. I looked in the adjoining closet, still nothing. At this point, I was feeling scared. I called my roommate and asked if he had just been home and had come into the bathroom. His reply was, "I've been here at work all day. I won't be home until tonight." I remember hanging up, getting dressed as quickly as possible, and leaving the house and calling my roommate back to tell him what happened and to call me when he gets home because I didn't want to be there alone. A few weeks later, I was just waking up and laying in the bed when the bedroom door slammed shut. It was slammed with such a force that I was stunned. I thought it had to be my roommate, or maybe one of our friends had spent the night and thought it would be funny. I went straight to his room and found it empty. I went to every room of the house, empty. I looked outside, my roommate's car wasn't outside anywhere. I called him, asking if he had been home and had slammed my door shut. He replied that he had gone out after his closing shift the night before and crashed at one of our friends' house. I was so terrified that I literally grabbed my car keys and ran out of the house in my pajamas and drove to my college campus. I sat in the library all day until my roommate got home. He was in shock that something else had happened. From then on, we started sleeping downstairs in the living room, and neither one of us would be there alone. Hoping to get some answers, we approached the landlord and asked if any other tenants had experienced activity like we were experiencing. She was very short in her replies and wouldn't give a direct answer. Next, we contacted the Kentucky Ghost Hunter Society for help. We only told them we had been having activity and they sent paranormal investigators and a medium. As soon as the medium walked up the stairs towards my bedroom, they stopped and said, "There is a dark figure standing in the door of that room. It is not a good spirit." I left at that point due to the feeling overwhelmed by what was happening. The medium also detected the spirit of a child around the age of 5 and the spirit of a man who was not a threatening entity, but just walked circles around my roommate's room. They said if we were to experience mischievous things, such as items falling over and things moving, it was most likely the spirit of the child. My roommate and I looked at each other and then told the medium about the items on the bookshelf. The entity focused in my bedroom was the one they were most concerned about, and they communicated they feared it may be demonic and didn't want to leave. Naturally, I opted to move out shortly after. In the process of packing, I turned to set a box in the hallway, and as I did, I stepped into a misty white cloud that disappeared as quickly as it appeared. It was like someone clapped chalkboard erasers together. I didn't feel threatened by it, just confused as to what I had just walked into. On my last day in the apartment, my mom came over to help me clean. When it started to get late, she told me to go back to their house since I had a test in the morning, and that she would finish mopping the stairs. It wasn't long after I got home that she came home. I remember her face was pale and she looked scared. When I asked what was wrong, she said she had been mopping the stairs and heard someone pacing back and forth in the bedroom above her. Knowing my roommate had already moved out and she was the only one there, she left as quickly as she could. I remember her telling me, "I don't know how you lived there." To this day, I don't know how I did either. Though 12 years have passed, I still get the chills when I talk about the experiences I had in that apartment. Story 5. I live on the outskirts of the small historic town of Vine Grove. It's a residential area well off the beaten path, surrounded by forest and close to Otter Creek. I lived here for 9 years with my chocolate lab bull mastiff mix named Harley. He had to be put down last year because he was deaf, almost blind, and was starting to get down in his hips. He was my best friend and it broke my heart to lose him. I haven't had any experiences with the paranormal since I was a little kid, living on a haunted farm with my mother and 3 siblings. But that is another story for another time. On November of 2012, the night it began, I was living alone with just Harley for company. He was sleeping across from me in his doggy bed next to the TV. I was laid back on my couch watching a late movie I'd been wanting to see. It was a little after midnight, and I noticed Harley was getting restless. He began to whimper and pace around the room. On his second lap, he stopped right by the door, staring down the hallway. I didn't think much of it at first, because he had already been out to do his business. I went back to my show, but after 4 or 5 minutes had passed, I noticed he still hadn't moved. I asked him if he saw a mouse or something, but he still did not avert his gaze. I started to feel uneasy, like we weren't alone in the house. I slowly got up and walked over behind Harley. I peered down the hallway to the open door of the bedroom on the very end, but it was pitch black. I stood there for a few minutes so my eyes would adjust. Then I heard this low guttural growl coming from Harley, the kind when you know a dog is serious and about to bite. I looked down at him and his hackles were raised. This made my apprehension even worse. I looked back down the hallway and for an instant I thought I saw a dark shadow figure move from the doorway. I thought, oh crap, there is someone in the house. I went to step past Harley to turn on the hall light, but he blocked me and pushed me and made me step back. He was determined to keep himself between me and whatever he was seeing or sensing. Then, just like that, it was over. Harley whimpered once more and went back and laid down. I tried to get back into my movie, but to no avail. I knew if I didn't go and check it out, I'd never rest that evening. So I got back up, pulled my bat out from behind the couch, turned on the hall light, and marched down the hall to the bedroom. I didn't waste any time. I quickly reached my hand in and flipped on the light. Cautiously, I stepped in. To my surprise, I could find nothing amiss. I checked the window and it was locked. I began to think my eyes had played tricks on me. I started to leave when I began to hear this eerie music from somewhere in the room. I walked to the middle of the room and sure enough, it was coming out of the floor vent. I thought, what in the hell? I walked to the doorway and could hear talking on the TV. I had nothing else on in the house. I walked back to the vent and it stopped abruptly. Then I heard the scraping coming from the closet, along with a familiar popping noise like dunk, dunk, dunk. It only took me a second before I realized what it was, and it instantly sent a shiver down my spine, and I immediately broke out in goosebumps. My mom had given me this 2-foot angel. It gave me the creeps because it held a candle, which was a clear Christmas bulb, under its chin, so the face was distorted by shadows. Exactly like when a person holds a flashlight under their chin to look scary. When it was plugged in, the arm holding the light moved back to its side and up, catching the wings, and it made a grinding, popping sound, like plastic grinding on plastic joints. And when the wings moved, it made a donk, donk, donk sound. The only thought I had at that moment was, oh my God, this damn thing is moving in the closet without power. I began to break out in a sweat. Part of me wanted to walk over and yank the door open, but my inner voice said, leave this room now. So I backed up out of the room and closed the door. I didn't even turn the light out. The next day I called my mom and she came to visit. I told her what happened, and when I did, she agreed we should get rid of it. I'm not sure, but I think it ended up at Goodwill. It was quiet for about a week or so, and then I met Nikki. I dated this girl off and on for 3 years, and quite a bit happened, so instead of trying to write it all down in one big story, I'm going to write it down in sections as the incidences occur. Thanks for your time. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories. Hope you enjoyed.